Okay, if you've been paying attention in this series, you basically have the gun down to this point. And I'm going to take this in two parts. One, because it's going to take me a while, and two, I really want to emphasize the second part is really only when necessary. I don't want you doing this very often. It tends to cause more problems than it's worth. And, you know, Rod will probably call me and say, what are you doing telling me to do that? But for the sake of a full breakdown in SS25, I want to make sure that I'm, you know, doing the due diligence to make sure you have everything that you need. Take out the first step here is to take out the IVG, and on this marker you can see it's turned in quite a bit. That's just the way this marker works, the way it's broken in. So I'm going to count how many turns I have that turned in, so that I know when I put it back together that I basically have the same settings that I had when I took it apart. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. Looks like 4 is flush, basically 4 1/4 turns, something like that. When you take this IVG out, the only thing you really need to inspect is the O-ring here. That O-ring stops it from vibrating. Just make sure it hasn't been cut up too bad. Put a new one on if necessary. Hammer then comes out. Oh, that's not a hammer, that's a spring. The spring then comes out. And then we're going to take out the hammer. Now the hammer, you can see, is being held in by the lug. Okay? The lug needs to be raised in order for it to come out of the marker. There's a lug access hole right here, and I always count 4 turns up so that I know I basically have it timed correctly when I put it back down. Okay? So 1, 2, 3, 4, and that hammer comes out. I'm going to polish that hammer. Make sure it stays very good. Also, you know, when you're tightening these up, this should be under some tension. There is a nylock screw set inside of here that can be tightened down if necessary. But make sure that that's under some tension. If not, check out the video that I'm going to link now on how to adjust your hammer a little bit. Now, the next thing that you're going to do is to take, to skip the valve, which is pretty much standard for you know, a normal cocker, and we're going to take out or sniper body. We're going to take off this front block. Okay. It's like a 3/32 takes that off. I never remember these. I have to always look down at my case. That comes off. And this front block, be very careful when taking it out and putting it back on. You're going to hear me say this time and time again, be very careful. Really gently slide this out, okay? Why? There are 2 O-rings on this block that goes in there. 1, 2. And they can be easily cut by putting them back in or pulling them out because of that hole where the grip frame tightens down into. It's really easy for a burr to get in there and cut that O-ring when you're taking it out or putting it back in. And there's nothing worse than doing some simple maintenance, putting that back in, airing it up, and it's leaking out this screw hole right here or this screw hole, depending on which O-ring you've screwed up. All right. Usually it's going to leak out this screw hole, and it's going to sound like it's leaking out of the grip frame. So if it's leaking out of the grip frame, it's probably this. And look at this here. I had a wrong screw in there one time, and I over tightened this. And what that did is it forced this valve up slightly, caused a leak until I figured out that it was a screw and not the O-ring. So don't do that either. At this point, we're ready to take out the valve. Now, on the other videos, what I would do is I would use this cocker tool next and take this out. But the SS25 and Series 5 Series 6 prototype doesn't use a cocker valve. It uses a spider valve. And what's the difference? Let me grab one of each here and show you the difference. Here is your standard sniper / cocker valve of today, and here is a spider valve of yesterday. All right. Both pins fit the same, are used in the same application, but they are different valves. And so they're retained differently. This valve is retained by using this divot. Look at that, that's a hole going straight through it, so we know it's going to be different. This valve is retained using this divot and a valve retention screw. This valve that you're seeing right in front of you has a hole, and so it has its own specialty screw that it uses that goes in this hole and has to seal itself. So an additional seal that you have to sort of worry about. So what we're going to take out now is this screw, which is this screw, and then we have to take the valve out. Okay? Now, oddly enough at this point, because of how wide this valve is, this front is bored out in a huge way. You can't even see down a sniper body or a cocker body like this. So the valve pin and spring just falls out, and it seats itself on this thing. Okay, so it goes like that. So what we've got now is we need a 5/32 wrench. And I want to stress to you again, don't take this out or the valve body out unless you absolutely freaking need to, which you normally don't. The 90% of your leak problems are going to come from this stem, which you can get to by just taking this out. The valve body has two static O-rings. It's just going to sit there. Here's what that looks like. It has one O-ring here and one O-ring here. Okay? It just sits there. There's very little reason for that to leak at all. If you get some leak, out the back or out the front or out the screw holes, to do that then. But if you're getting leak down the barrel, take off the front block, right? Take off this adapter, dump out the valve, replace the whole stem and things, or just the O-ring on the modular system like we've got here, and put it back together. Don't take out the valve. Don't mess with it if it isn't broken. But we're going to mess with it just in case you need to take this apart. So we take this screw out. I'm immediately going to put some hater sauce on there. Some hater marmalade, I should say. So I remember that. That O-ring has to seal. The other one, of course, was a screw. It doesn't have to seal. Now what we've got left is a cocker or a spider valve that's in here, and it has to come out. And it's not coming out. So what you need is some sort of dowel or other device to push this valve out. Now again, be very, very careful while doing so, because of that hole again, and this hole will cut those O-rings if you're not careful. Even that hole will cut the O-rings. So what I advise is just, again, being very careful. And I use a flat blade screwdriver to guide those O-rings past those holes while I'm pushing, so that they don't get cut as I carefully remove this valve. Okay? That's the valve out. And now what you have is a clean, clear bottom tube that you can run a squeegee down just in case you want to clean it or whatever. But that's one of the cool advantages about this body, is that you don't have all the internal threading that the old cocker bodies do, or the new cocker bodies or sniper bodies or whatever we're talking about. So that is it disassembled. Let me put this together here real quick. That's what that valve looks like inside the gun, bottom tube. And you can see how different, if you've taken apart snipers before, how different that looks. There's no retaining nut back here. This valve looks different. That's the same, and that's the same. But in this area here is where all the difference is. Now we're going to put it back together, okay? So we're going to clean this off, and we got to be so careful here, man. And these O-rings are so darn thin, too, that they just want to cut on you when you're putting them back in. And I'm going to inspect that real quickly. Make sure I don't see any cuts, because if I do, I'm going to fix it right now. I don't have any leaks, of course, because the gun was running just fine before I met you guys. No, before I started making this video. So I'm going to put a freaking liberal amount of grease on this bad boy. Now, there is a correct way to put this in and an incorrect way. This is the part that has to go on this side of the marker. This is the part that matches up with the O-ring. This is the part that takes the pin. Notice if I turn this around, how it wallows around and you got a mess. So this is going in like this, okay? So we're going to slide this back in, and this can be such a pain at times. Put the hole that you know used to go down. I can see where I probably put my screw before, so I'm putting this in, I believe, the correct way. And start sliding that in, again, ever so carefully. And you can use your finger for a while, then you have to switch over to the dowel. But start sliding this in. Now I'm at this first spot that I'm going to guide this O-ring past. Got this tip from Rod, and I really think it helps. Maybe it just makes me feel better, I don't know, but now I need my dowel. In this case I'm using a paintbrush. Alright, that's passed now. And that should be pretty much lined up. I can tweak that line up a little bit with this screwdriver here. So you want that hole to line up there. And again, we've greased this valve nut that has to seal, or, you know, el succo. And we tighten that down. That's the valve put back, okay? Now, we got a weird thing to do, is we got to try to drop this valve in and hit the hole. Usually I try to, you know, hold that onto there like that and drop it in, but it can take a few times. I seem to have gotten it that time. Okay, so that drops in the front. Now we're ready to put this block adapter on. Again, this is a mini body, so we're going to start pushing this past. Again, carefully feeding that O-ring past there and lining that up. Making sure that this block is flush on the sides of the marker. And then using our screw here and putting that back in. I need the right wrench. And that's not it. And that gets tightened down. Okay? Make sure you guys are seeing that. That seems to be good. Okay, good to go there. Then, just like the rest of the Cocker bodies, put the hammer back in after it's polished and cleaned up. You can run the hammer in a Series 6 and Series 5. You can run that with a little bit of tri-flow. You can run it dry too. I tend to run my closed bolt designs or closed hammer designs with just a drop of dry flow. I just make sure, tri-flow, I just make sure that it's just, you know, a little bit. A little bit of tri-flow goes a long way. Drop that in and make sure that the lug lines up here. Wrong wrench again. That should then line up with this hole here. 4 turns back in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Puts that back in. Spring goes in next. And then your IVG goes in. And that's your bottom tube. I think I had 4 1/4 turns on that bottom tube from flush. 1, 2, 3, 4, something like that. So that's the bottom part of the marker taken apart and put back together. I'm going to now put the entire thing back together and show you how to time this, and we'll see if it has any leaks at this point. If it does, you'll probably hear cursing and I'll have to refilm the video. But that's TF, taking this apart, putting it back together. Join me on the next video. Thanks.